Welcome to episode 7 of the Through Married Eyes podcast. Today I have Michael and Tracey Prieto with us.
Hello, we're so happy to be here.
Yes, we are.
Thank you guys for being here. So we'll start off by asking, how long have you guys been married?
So July 1st will be 14 years.
14 years. Congratulations. And how long was the dating period?
Oh man, you want the honest answer?
The the honest one.
So we met and married in 3 months. I wouldn't
was there
recommend
any
it.
engagement period, or was it just...
Was what, half of that engaged?
Okay, no, I think that we met at the very end of March, maybe the first part of April, and
Wasn't it after Tori's birthday?
I think it was probably June-ish that I finally said, okay, we can get married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how did you meet and how did your relationship start?
So we met at church, and it started probably at a church event. We were both invited to the church event, and then we both started just helping clean up, and I was cooking the event, so we just met that way.
Okay, I have a completely different scenario of that. So what actually happened was our pastor's wife at the time had told me that she was going to have some close friends and family that were going to be coming to eat after church in the Anthem building, which was like a youth wing, but it had a big kitchen and eating area in it. And she asked me if I would like to come because I had just started attending the church and she wanted me to get to know different people. And it just happened to be that Mike was the chef for the night. Well, I didn't actually know that, and I didn't know who he was, but at church that night, that morning at church, I saw him across the way because his sister was my pastor's wife's daughter-in-law. And I was like, who is that? And I was good friends with his sister. And she let me know then.
She probably said, "Who's that cute guy?"
I actually did not, but I thought it. But then a little bit later, somehow my daughter Victoria was 4 years old, and a little bit later that morning, I saw her. She had gone to Sunday school, and after Sunday school, he was walking around with her, holding her hand, and I was like, how in the world did this stranger get my daughter to walk off with him like that? I was like, what has happened? It was him and my sister-in-law's husband. And so I was like floored. And then I found out he was the one cooking. So of course I said yes, that I was going to go because he was cute. And obviously my kid liked him. So,
So that worked out.
It worked out.
And for anybody who's listening, this man is a wonderful, wonderful chef. He is absolutely incredible at any cooking. Puts my cooking to shame for sure.
Not even close, but I do enjoy cooking.
And how long did it take for each of you to know that you wanted to marry the other?
Well, for both of us, it's drastically different. For me, it was probably 2 dates in.
Yeah. So that night after he cooked for me, for that group, we were cleaning up the kitchen, and my son, who is 23 now, he was 8 years old then, we were getting ready to leave, and I kept saying, okay, well, let's go. And my son, Will, said, oh, can I ride with Mike? And I was like, no, we don't know him. Anyway, and so Jackie, my sister-in-law, made a comment, it's my brother, it's fine. And so they actually, I guess, he we were we had just moved into a new place, and I had not set up my son's Xbox. And so my son somehow had talked him into coming and setting his Xbox up that night. And so he knew where I lived. Well, the very
I didn't know where you lived at the time, but you lived close to my sister Jackie, so I
yes.
knew the area.
Yeah, so he knew. Well, I mean, because he brought my son home that night, he knew. Like then, he knew where I lived, and so uh, I said, I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, come, come over." And we, so he set up the Xbox and stuff like that, and then that night after he got home, he messaged me and asked if he could take me to lunch the next day.
Oh man, Will was definitely the wingman in this situation.
Will and Victoria,
Mhm.
my son and daughter.
That's awesome. And how did the proposal take place?
So it was pretty normal. We took it to a restaurant. It's called Chimichurri's. It's here on Lake Houston, and right after dinner, I asked her to marry me, and it was a little different because at the time the pastor that we were sitting under didn't believe in rings, and so I had bought matching watches and had used that to propose with.
So, what would you say the best moment of your dating relationship was? I know that it was very short, but what would you say the best moment was? If you could pinpoint just one.
Oh man.
Oh man,
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, the first date stands out just because it was just um, there was a lot of bantering back and forth. We both are pretty witty, and so we went to Joe's Crab Shack and ate. And she brought Victoria, our daughter, our youngest, and we had a great dinner. But Trace and I just we get along really well. So at the time, I wasn't working, and she was at home with Jamie, our oldest daughter, who had cystic fibrosis. And so we were able to spend pretty much every day together for about 2 months, maybe even 3 months. And we just got along really well. We were together all the time. Shortly after we had met, Tracy was in an accident, and Tori um, was in the back seat and had broke something on each leg. So she had like a cast on each leg. And so I was able to kind of just step in and just really help. And I don't know, we got along really well.
So he says it so modestly, but um, both of us had previously been married, and I had come out of a really a very hard relationship and a very unloving marriage, and it was I had been very kind of just tormented to a degree about men, and if they're really good, if they're not good, and um, God actually used the faithfulness of Mike to and the tenderness of him to show me that what God created for me to have as a husband could happen. So there were a whole lot of things that happened in a very short 3 month period of time that showed me some major character milestones. So one of them, like he said, I was in an accident. I had broke my pinky and like the far side of my hand. So because that was broken, my hand was in like a semi cast. Victoria was in 2 cast on her legs. So like full cast on her legs. Will had broke a rib. Okay. Jamie had just come home from the hospital, and they had put a central line inside of her. So there's 3 girls, and we all have a ton of hair. Okay. I could not wash hair. Jamie could not wash. Jamie couldn't get her incision from her surgery wet. Victoria had 2 casts on her legs. I couldn't even pick her up, right? And so I remember one of the most like impactful moments that just let me know that God had sent me somebody that truly cared was one when he showed up after he realized that I was having to pick up Victoria and try to get her to the car to bring to bring Jamie and Will to school, he was like, I'll get there in the mornings. And so he would show up every morning and he would make French toast, and he would take the older two kids to school so that I wouldn't have to. So he would get there, make breakfast for us, take the other two kids to school. And if he had some running around or whatever that he had to do, then he would go and take care of that. And then he would come back in time to help pick them up or whatever. And then when he realized that it had been days since we had been able to wash our hair, he goes, what if y'all just lay across the kitchen counter and we'll have a hair washing night? And it was so, I was just like, what? And he was like, really? I can wash y'all's hair. And so he washed we would lay there on the counter in the kitchen, and he would wash our hair in the kitchen sink because, I mean, we had a lot of hair and we had to get our hair washed, you know? And so that was just a moment that I think all three of us as girls knew from that very moment we were going to be extremely spoiled people. And from that very moment, neither of my girls would let me stop dating him. So it was done. They were like, he's going to spoil us like this? Yeah, we're keeping this guy, whether you want us to or not.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And it just shows like a lot of selflessness, just willingness to serve the other. And I think that that's just so beautiful. So on the other hand, I think that it might be this, it might be something else, but the worst moment of your dating relationship, would you say it was probably having to go through the accident, or would it be something else?
All right.
So, yeah, probably the craziest story. I don't know. I call it the worst, but the craziest was
okay, but it was the worst for me. The most embarrassing, worst story. And y'all have to remember, I just told you about my crazy ex-husband who was very abusive. Okay, so here we go.
So, I had put a curfew on us because we had been married before, and I know me, and we were trying to, live right and do things the right way. And she had kids, so I wanted to show them, about being respectful. And so I had put a curfew on, on us hanging out. And so I had left her house. I think it was like 11 o'clock at night. And I pulled out and I'm driving down the street, and all of a sudden I see a car coming my way. And I didn't really think anything about it. I just noticed it because it was super dark, super late. No one else was on the road. And so it passes me. Well, as it's passing me, immediately it does like a 3-point turn and turns around. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And all of a sudden, someone pulls up next to me and starts yelling at me. And we're driving. I mean, literally in this neighborhood, we're driving. And I realize it's James. And he is following me.
James is my ex-husband, okay?
Yes. And he is just driving really erratically, and I don't know the neighborhood hardly at all. I'm new to town, and so I'm just trying to remember how to get out of the neighborhood, and I end up on another road that's a blinking red light. So I stop just to I didn't know what else, like make sure there's no one else coming before I cross. Well, when that happens, he pulls up right next to me and pulls a gun through the car window and is just yelling. Well, at that point, I just take off across the road. I'm like, I'm out of here. And he follows me. At this point, we're on a main road. So at that, and everything's closed. Well, I see a gas station, catty corner, and I see lights. And so all I could think about was I just need to get to some light. I just need to get where someone else can see, because if he shoots me, I mean, I need to be somewhere where people see it. So at that point, had already called Tracey while I'm driving, trying to get away from him, and he's following me like a madman. And I'm telling her, hey, he just pulled a gun on me. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so I pull into the gas station, and I go like right in front of it to where everyone that's there can see me. Not that there's a lot of people there, but there's a lot of light. And I guess he realizes, wait a minute, I'm out in the open. Okay. So he just turns off and goes the other way and keeps on driving. At that point, Tracey had gotten off the phone, and she's like, hey, let me call you right back. I called the cops. They came out. And the craziest thing is I told Tracey, says, hey, the cops are asking me if I want to press charges. And I said, okay, you should. And she says, no, no, I can't.
No, no, no. The cops asked you, do you want to press charges?
Oh,
And you
yes.
asked me,
Yes,
do
that's what it
you
was.
want me to press
Yes. And you
charges?
said no.
And
Yes.
I didn't want him to press charges because in my mind it was like, well, you know, whenever you've been remarried and you have lived, I was married to him for 13 years and all I could think was, oh, he was just mad. Like that's how distorted whenever you're in a bad marriage, that's how distorted your view of what is acceptable can be. And I just remember Mike looking at me and he's like, and I said, no, if you press charges, it'll ruin his life. Now, who cares that he was about to ruin our lives, right? But that's all I could think was, is he's a nurse and he's a real estate agent, and like he'll never be able to work again. And all I could think was that. And so this is to me how godly of or how much God really gave me a turning point in my mind because Mike honored my wishes and he told the cop, no, I don't want to press charges. However, after the cop left, Mike walked back into the house and he sat me down and he very seriously, looked at me and he wasn't mad. He wasn't yelling or screaming. And I, first of all, was blown away by that because he had been in such a, that was such a huge moment and so charged that he had every right to be upset with me. But he just sat me down and he looked at me and he said, I don't think that you get it. And I was like, what? And I'm thinking in my mind, he's mad because I didn't let him press charges. And he said, Tracey, he wasn't coming after me with a gun. He was driving to your house where you and your kids were with a gun. I distracted him and he turned and chased me. But I'm not the one that he was after. And in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most horrible thing. Like it very well, my ex-husband later went on to commit suicide. And it very well could have been a murder suicide moment in my life had God not sent Mike. And if Mike would have blown up with me in the moment and not acted like a Christian and, the man that God wanted him to be, then I may not have heard what he had to say, but I did hear it because of the way that he said it. And it was also that changing point for me to go, oh, wow, wait a minute. There are men out there that are completely different than what I've ever been used to. So that was the worst moment in my mind of any of our that was really the only bad dating story that I can think of because everything else was just happy and fun.
Yeah.
And
With us, I mean, uh, our relationship, yours and mine, it was good. It was the outside influences of of others that definitely played a role.
mm-hmm,
Hmm.
yeah,
But you and I, we always, for the most part, we always got along.
mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this actually kind of relates to the next question, which is what were the main distinctions that you were able to make between your spouse and past partners that let you know that they were very, very
We don't have time for that.
different? And because both of you, for context for those who are listening, like they said before, both of them had been married before in the past. So not only were there past dating relationships, but there was past marriages that they're able to compare between.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, just you know, being with a godly woman who who believed in me, who was loyal, um, who knew how to have fun. Like I said, we're both pretty witty, and so we got along just on a different level. But being able to see everything about each other, but still love them, still stay committed, still be willing to do life with each other, even knowing all that, I think is probably the the coolest thing about it.
And I would say for me, the thing that stands out most about the difference between my ex-husband and Mike, or even people that I didn't, other than my ex-husband, actually, I don't think I ever dated anyone that was just, that had ill intentions or bad intentions. I didn't have bad relationships like that. But Mike's commitment to honor and to live out God's word was very different, which was kind of funny because my ex husband was a pastor and Mike was very far from a pastor at that point. And so the the difference that I saw the most in was that, one thing that he started almost right away is he came up to me and he said, um, hey, I don't know if this is like just me or if it's God, and he had just gotten back in church. So he was really kind of learning to re-listen to God again. And he said, but I feel like that we need to start doing family devotions with your kids. And I was like, okay, my kids, right? Like, okay. And so I said, well, if you want to, we can. Now, mind you, we had never done, I'd been married for 13 years before, and we had never done family devotions with our kids. I mean, we pastored a church and we were just at church all the time, but we were just working. We weren't really serving God the same way that Mike's family had taught him to serve God. And so it became a highlight of our evening was before the kids would get ready for bed, or maybe after they got ready for bed, however it worked out, he would do a family devotion with us. We weren't even a family yet. We were just boyfriend and girlfriend. And he already had that much invested into the, just into how he felt like, he was just that in tune with what our family needed, and gave that much attention to it. And that was amazing to me. And he was consistent with it. Like, we never missed family devotion for years after that. We never missed family devotion. And so it became a staple in our house, where even when the kids would get older, when we started noticing different things, we would pull out, hey, it's time for family devotion, and they loved it still, even as they got older. So, the consistency was huge, and the way that he loved everybody and treated us all like we had been his our whole lives.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And you had mentioned that he was doing this right after getting back into church. So I assume that that means that you had been in church before, but you had maybe fallen away. Do you want to talk about your experience with that and how that kind of either pushed you in the right direction in your marriage, or if it caused some friction?
Well, I don't think it caused friction necessarily. But when Tracy and I met, I was not living for God. I wasn't, what most people would consider a Christian. I had actually been heavily addicted to drugs, alcohol. That's actually the reason I was here, because in Houston. I was living in Dallas, but I had come to Houston because I just knew I needed a break. I wasn't planning on giving up drugs. I just knew I needed a break. And while I was here on that hiatus, if you will, that's when I met Tracy. And in meeting her, we were talking about finding that right woman who was able to see past all of that. We still managed to become friends, and then shortly after that, I mean, God just I decided to give my life back to God, and he completely just delivered me from my addictions, and changed my life for the better. So I don't know that, like, um, it played a part like in a bad way,
Mm-hmm.
because she was really open to, hey, look, he's a fun guy, he's a good guy, and everyone has a past, if you will. So she was able to see all that, but yet, look at me and view me for who I was now.
Yeah. And do you think that she was a big driver for helping facilitate you getting closer in your walk with God?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Having that, we've touched on it, but having that right spouse, that knows how to, push you in a good way, makes all the difference. And so, um, it was really, I mean, it was, that part was really good. It wasn't bad. I do think that since we didn't know each other, from our past, we were able to come into it, just seeing each other for where we were at that moment, without the additional baggage of, oh, well, I knew you, before this, or I knew you before that. We just were like, hey, we just met and this is where we are in our lives. And then we could grow from there. And I think we did that simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I think that was a God thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it definitely sounds like it. And you can see the evidence of that now. So, what were the first thing or the first things that you noticed about your spouse when you first met them, whether it was physical or personality trait? What was the first things that you noticed?
So probably for me, it would probably be D, all the above. Uh, she just had a she has a way about her, and if you know my wife, you know that she, I mean, of course we're 14 years older now, but she had a certain way of doing her hair that just stood out. She had a certain way of dressing that stood out. She held herself, um, with a lot of class, and that stood out above everyone else. And then she had a personality as big as Texas, and that stood out. And she was absolutely stunning in every way that just made her stand out above the crowd. And I mean, you couldn't help but when she walked into a room or when you look across the room, be like, man, that's Tracey. And so everybody, and then again, our personalities clicked as well. And so it was just a full package, when you, not only when you could see her and see, oh, she is, stunning, beautiful, but then when you met her and it's like everything is just, equally as impressive. So,
I feel like that you should just insert a picture of a when we got married and how we looked and how we looked 14 years later. So for him to still say all of those, all of those crazy things, I do appreciate that. He's always been um, my biggest fan and encouragement, and makes me feel like I'm worth way more than I ever ever thought I was. For me, his the one of several things stood out, but to me, one, yes, he was absolutely adorable. He was just the cutest guy. And just a side note, this is what's kind of funny, but I'm just going to tell y'all anyway because this is kind of juicy too. So the first time that I got married, um, I was what most people would say was a very good looking female. Okay. And I married a guy who, most people would not say was a very great looking guy. I mean, they just were like, why are you marrying him? But I married him because I was like, he's got a stable job. He's a nurse. He's got, like three fields of income. I was just like, this is stability. And I grew up, um, without stability. And so all I saw was, wait a minute, this guy's going to treat me like I am gold. Like he's going to be the best husband. And he, all of these things. And so when I met Mike, I was like, huh, the first time I went for all of the right things. This time I'm just going for looks. He was so cute. And all of the other singles in the church were just like chasing him. And it was super, super funny to me that he noticed me. And so to me, the biggest thing that stood out was how handsome he was. He's like, you got a great personality and you love God. And to me, I was just like, man, he is so, so cute. And of course, then whenever I met him and hung out with him just a little bit, I realized he's not just cute. Like we clicked really well, and we had a lot of banter and back and forth. And he was very easy to flirt with. Shows you how spiritual I was.
So, if you had to then describe your spouse in 3 words or less,
Uh-oh.
what would that be? What would those words be?
oh man, classy, stunning, and hmm, assertive.
Assertive. I
First time I've
appreciate
heard that
babe.
one.
Assertive. Really? Assertive?
You are.
Oh, that's awesome. I would say that if I had to describe him, I would describe him in godly, handsome, and um, not um, not prideful, but very
Confident?
confident. He was very, very confident.
Perfect. So, what would you say is a Bible passage or verse that reminds you of your marriage?
Mm.
Oh man.
I'll tell you mine because I know it right away. Mine is seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Because when I met him, the only thing I was really worried about was figuring out how to get my life back on track with God and to really truly seek the kingdom of God and not titles or positions or who anybody was. I just wanted to figure out what was expected of me, and how could I seek God. And whenever I truly feel like that I was doing that, was whenever God put Mike into my life. And it was like God saying, hey, all of the things that you thought all the things I promised you as a child, now because you're truly seeking me and not another agenda, I'm willing to give those things to you. So I would say that was mine.
I need one too.
Does he need
No,
one
no,
too?
no, you don't have to.
have.
You
Yes,
don't
you
have
have to have one, babe.
Well, I mean, I think my favorite verse goes with us.
What is it?
It's in Psalms. And it's one thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. And I do think that we have put that first in our life, in our marriage, and in our family, about seeking God and, just spending time, in his house, serving and doing everything we can just to be in the presence of the Lord.
So, how would you say, just pivoting subjects a little bit, how would you say your upbringing shaped your views of dating and marriage?
Mm-hmm. Well, my upbringing um, was my parents were every 3 to 6 months, my parents were separated, gonna get a divorce, but then they would get back together. My dad, I remember growing up and actively watching my dad have affairs on my mom. My grandparents really were kind of more of the stabling factor of me looking to see, what a marriage should be like. And so they were in church, but we didn't live with them, and so I didn't really even understand that what it was, though that they were the ones that came and rescued us all the time when my dad would have a blow up. My dad was an abusive alcoholic, and so my upbringing and the way that I thought that marriage was supposed to work. I mean, I knew that it wasn't supposed to be what my mom and dad had, which um, my dad never held like a steady or stable job, which was why I thought that I was just getting a prize the first time around. And so um, it shaped me into thinking almost that one, you take anybody back no matter what they've done to you. And then the other thing that I would say that was a very big negativity for me going into my first marriage was I went into it with this idea that I was never going to allow my kids to experience what I experienced, which was me leaving and taking them somewhere else and taking them out of school and things like that. I was very set that I would never go through a divorce, that we would never be separated. So no matter what came my way, I took it because I thought that I was protecting my children and shielding them from the hurt that I had experienced as a child. And that obviously was not really what God's plan was, but I was so ashamed of the fact that I had come from a divorced family, that I never wanted my kids to have that experience. And so it was really my childhood that shaped a lot of the way that my first marriage went. And then it was really a lot of my walk with God and Mike's childhood that has shaped the way that our marriage has gone now, because he has a very different story, and I'll let him tell that.
Yeah, so my mom and dad, they are very involved in church. They are just very good people, and they have been married for well over 40 years, probably closer to 50 years now. So I was raised, in
FYI, they've been married over 50 years.
no,
Yeah. Didn't they celebrate their 50th?
no, not yet. Almost. It's
It's
getting
right
closer.
here. Yes.
It's getting
Okay.
closer. But they showed me what a godly marriage should be. Although I didn't uh, heed that example the first time around, I definitely learned from my mistakes and heeded it this time around. And Tracy is a lot like my mom in the sense that she loves people. She has a servant's heart. She's loves to tell people about Jesus, and so I definitely am relying and leaning on that example during this marriage, and we have the whole time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you end up, were you raised in church, or when did you get into church? How did that go for you in your childhood?
So, I was not raised where we went to church on a regular basis. I was raised where, Easter and Mother's Day, we went to church with my grandparents. Uh, Probably some Father's Days, just depending. But I was not raised in church where I was regularly attending at all. When I was about 12 years old, my brother wanted to date a girl that was in church. Was she was Pentecostal, and so she told him, "Well, I can't date you because you don't go to church." So he woke me up one morning and said, "Hey, let's go to church." And so I was 12, and I kind of got my first taste of being in church when I was 12 years old. And there was a family that was very influential in my life, Dixie Daigle, who is still one of my very best friends today, who kind of took me under her wing. She was 16, maybe even 17, and was willing to hang out with a 12-year-old girl who came from a really rough home. And she tried to keep me in church, even though my brother was not interested in the girl anymore and he stopped going to church, right? But she still kept very close in contact with me. Well, it wasn't long because, like I said, my parents were always, 6 months on, 6 months off. And so we had moved away from there. But I got a taste of church when I was 12. And then when I was 17 years old, um, I had gone through a really hard time in my life where I just wanted to experience a lot of the world, and I found myself in some pretty desperate situations. So much so that my mom had actually moved me across town to get me away from a guy that I was dating, and just wanted me to completely and totally just, I had to change my life. And I hit kind of a spot in my life where I knew that if I didn't make some changes, that I was just going to end up a, um, you know, a teenage mom, and, you know, probably have multiple husbands throughout my life. And I was in a real bad situation where I couldn't get out of my own head. And there were some girls that walked into a boutique a dress shop that I was working in, and they went to a United Pentecostal church in Houston. And I could tell they were Pentecostal by the way that they looked. And whenever they walked in, I remembered that. They were also very friendly and loving. One of them's name was Shannon Wilpitz, and Uh, she's still a friend of mine today as well. And and I just looked at them and I said, y'all, are y'all Pentecostal? And where do y'all go to church? And they told me where they went to church, and they asked me where I lived. And then they said, well, there's a church right down the street from you. You should go try that church out. So I called the pastor's wife and I went to that church. And I was a junior in high school. And the church that I went to when I was 12 years old, who had always tried to stay in contact with me. They didn't, it wasn't like we talked every week, because back then you didn't have social media or cell phones or anything like that. You literally wrote letters. And so
Man, you're
they,
old.
and so they had, kind of still had contact with me. Well, word got back to them that I started going to church, and the pastor, which was Brother McCoy, um, Bishop McCoy, it was Daryl McCoy. He called me and he said, I feel like God wants you to move back to Port Arthur, Texas. And I was like, yeah, well, you better let my mom feel that, because she is not going to let me move. And where would I live? And he was like, don't worry about any of that. He said, I feel like God wants you to move back here, and he wants you to go to our private school. And so, I didn't worry about it. I went and visited. He talked to my mom, and my mom let me move back. I moved in with the Daigle family, Dixie's parents. I moved in with them, and I lived with them for the next year and a half. While I finished school, it allowed me to make up the time. I wasn't going to graduate on time. And so um, that private school allowed me to be able to graduate with my normal graduating class. And I never turned back from that moment on. It just, once I hit a place where I knew that my life was not going to be anything that I wanted it to be, then I gave it to God, and he worked it out. He worked it all out. Like, it goes back to the whole seek ye first the kingdom of God. It seems like that anytime we get off track, if we can remember that, then he puts us back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And what was your story regarding being in church and out of church, and how did that go?
Oh, how did you get out of church?
Oh, okay. Well, um, so I was raised in church. I, from about the time I was two, I was in church, and we were raised to serve in any capacity, and do anything that the church needed. So we were at church probably 5 to 6 nights a week, and we were just always there. Whatever, we were very involved in several ministries, and just grew up very involved, very active. And so, but being, a 20-year-old and wanting to do life my own way and, figure things out, I decided to get married against my parents' wishes and against my pastor's advice. And I went and eloped, and it just didn't work out, obviously. What wasn't the right trajectory for my life, which led to a divorce 5 years later. Uh, but out of it, I did have a wonderful son whose name is Ethan, and um, but going from being a husband and a dad, and starting out in church, to being divorced, and not having your son all the time, and not even being a husband anymore, and just kind of essentially losing everything, if you will, just put my headspace in a really bad place. And so I turned to going out, and I turned to partying, and I turned to drinking, and gambling, and which eventually led me to drugs, and just obviously it's a um, kind of a vicious cycle, because that led me to bad relationships, and of course harder partying, and harder drugs, and more drinking, and it was just a vicious cycle, which uh, ended up leaving me without anything, to the point where I felt like, okay, I don't want to give it all up, but I need a break. If I am gonna uh, you know be a success, or whatever, if you will, in life, I needed a break, and then that's what brought me to Houston. So then at that point, now 14 years later, that's history.
So, How would you say that your financial situation over time has affected your relationship?
Um, well, we've been very blessed. Um, I mean, God has always provided. We um, we started out not making hardly anything, or at least I did. When we first got married. Of course, as we said, Tracy had three kids. I had one, but we never raised them as hers and mine. They were always ours. And um, not too long after we had gotten married, Ethan had come to live with us, and so that put four kids, along with us. And God has just always provided, and has definitely blessed along the way. Um, you know, you know, just it's been amazing to watch. We're not, you know, rich by any means, but we've always managed to pay the bills and and take care and have a good life.
Yeah, so would you say that you've been pretty consistently stable? Because I know the reason why I ask is because in a lot of divorces, finances is one of the main things that causes arguments. And so knowing that there can be a lot of contention, even if it's not that the money's not there, but rather I want to spend my money this way and this
Mm.
person wants to spend their money that way.
So, at the very beginning of our relationship, we um, we actually read a book that I would suggest for anyone that is gonna get married, and it was the um, 10 must-have conversations before you get married. And one of those chapters went over finances, and it did dig a little bit into if you were a blended family. So our situation was a little different. I was the custodial parent who should have been receiving child support. However, my ex-husband did not pay child support. He was like, I don't know, 20 something thousand in the rears. And so he didn't pay child support. Every now and then I would get something, but it was never consistent. It was never anything. So that burden of even providing for my kids also laid completely and solely on Mike and me. And he never looked at it as, well, I mean, that's, I'm buying school clothes for my son, you buy them for your kids. We never ever did that. We put our finances together from day one. We It was never, this is my money and this is your money, because our thought was that's not how you do it in a traditional marriage. So why would you do it that way in a blended family? If we're going to be a family, then there's still biblical principles that we need to put in place. And one of them also went with our finances, right? And so um, we never had his and her bank accounts. We never did any of those things. There was a point when I made quite a bit more money than him whenever we first got married, which, and I say quite a bit more money, but I was making all of $48,000 a year. Compared to his probably 30, but that was okay. We were surviving. It wasn't a lot of money, but we were surviving. And so, then there came a time, he was working for our church at that time. He worked at the church. And so we kind of made that sacrifice because he felt like after he had lived for the world for so long that he needed to give back to God. And so we made the decision together that it was a smart move spiritually for him to be at the church full time and giving back what he needed to. And then, like he said, when Ethan came to live with us, which coincidence, Ethan and Will are 5 months apart. So I went from one almost teenage boy to two almost teenage boys, and that was a lot of fun. And but it also meant double the groceries and double growing kids. And if you've seen our boys, you would know exactly what we're talking about. And so he made the decision that he needed to go get a job. Well, of course, when he went and got a job, he doubled my income. Actually, he probably almost tripled my income within the first 2 years of him having a job. So things were definitely better. I would say that one reason that we were so blessed is there was never a time, no matter how much money that we made, that there was ever a question of paying our tithes and our offering. And that has probably been the reason that we have been so blessed financially. Most people would say, hey, you have 4 kids and y'all are making, less than $60,000 a year. How did you do it? And our kids never missed anything, and we never missed, if it was involved with church, they did not. And when we were able to give and have other people over, one thing I learned from him was he was the most giving person ever. And so even if we didn't have it, a lot of times we would give, and I feel like God just gave back to that and allowed us to do it. And now he has his own company, and he is, or we have a very successful business, covered concrete coatings. Just a plug. And then we also pastor a church, Christ Tabernacle in Huffman, Texas, and the church has been very blessed. And I I believe that all of those things are because we gave, even if we when we didn't have to give. We never we always honored God's word in our tithes and our offering. And my husband says it all the time, talent, and treasure. And we made sure that we did all of those equally. So that would be
Yeah,
the best.
I think that obviously the giving is the biggest part of that. Um, but you kind of touched on, yes, we both did come out of divorces, with things on our credit, and made
Mm-hmm.
it harder, and definitely more limited. But God even made a way, in those situations too. But the key was just, throughout those first couple of years, just doing the right thing every time. It wasn't an overnight, oh man, my credit score went up 200 points. It wasn't anything like that, but it was just a matter of, hey, what's the next right decision that we can do? Not only for God, because we were doing that, not only for our family, because we were doing that, but even for, hey, how can we reestablish, for our future?
Yeah.
And Tracy's really good with finances and with looking into the future on making that next right decision. So immediately, I let her be in charge of all that. I realized that is not my forte. I am a spender, not a saver, and so she kind of helped lead and guide and kind of direct that. But that's also a part of, God leading us was in that as well. Being able to put a little money aside and being able to reestablish our credit. And uh, but if you can do that every day, and now, I mean, the you know incentivized interest rates and all that are now part of our everyday living. We don't have to worry about a high interest rate or anything like that. But it came from those first couple of years of just being very diligent and making sure everything was taken care of.
Yeah.
But it can be
Absolutely.
done.
Yeah, sacrifices in the beginning have to happen. That's what I would say to anyone. And we hear a whole lot, because we've counseled many couples that are starting out, and we hear a lot that they want their money to be their money, and I we don't personally believe that that's the way that God intended for it to be. As people get married, they're getting married at older than what they probably used to, and so I think that everybody feels like it's a mine thing. Well, marriage isn't about mine. Marriage is about ours. And so it was our money. And one thing that we made very good habits of is, pick a day of the week on Sundays, for instance, saying, hey, this is what we have to do this week. This is how much money we have left. Or sometimes we did it on Sundays, but then we moved it to Fridays, and I would send home an email and I would say, I paid all of these bills today. This is what we've got. So we could either spend it all this weekend or we can be smart
Yeah.
and only eat out once and then have money for the rest of the week. And so, but the communication of that, and then making it ours, and not about who makes more, or I get to spend more because I make this much and you don't make this much. I never treated him like, even those few years that I made more than him, nobody would have ever guessed that I made more money, because that was his money too. And he told me, if he said, hey, I don't want us to spend money on that, then I said, okay. Because, that was, even though I was, in charge, I say that in air quotes, but in charge of the finances, there was never a penny that was spent that he didn't know about. And and that he didn't approve of. So I would never have gone and done something about his permission and just been like, well, you said I was in charge. We never did it like that. I was basically in charge of making sure we still had money for groceries.
Yeah, and y'all are a team. You work
Mhm.
together and
Mm-hmm.
not against each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awesome. And we had talked about earlier blending the family, like financially, but also kind of hitting on how it was blending your family just in general, how that process was, if it
Oh,
was peaceful, if there were some issues that came up.
well, there's always issues.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way around that. When you're blending, uh, a husband and wife, that's hard enough, and then you throw into the mix kids and past traumas and um, just all the other things that come along with it that just follow you. There's no way around it. You're going to have problems. You're going to have issues arise, and our biggest saving grace, and I mean this very intentionally, and that is love. Um, Not only our love for God and being intentional on, our Bible studies and, taking almost every decision we made to the Word and holding it against the Word. Okay, how are we going to handle this? Well, the Bible says this. When I say the Word, I mean the Bible. And in handling it that way, we measured everything against that. Just even in our discipline, even in our communication, we were very intentional on using each other's strengths, but also not belittling the weaknesses. So Tracy was really good at communicating, so I would rely on that. I was the level-headed one, so she would rely on that when we needed it. There were times when we would say, okay, hey, I cannot discipline this kid because we're not. It's bad, right? It gets heated. So I need you to discipline them right now, just for a season, because every time we come against it clashes, and we would do that from both sides. She would come to me and say that, and I would go to her and say that. But the biggest thing was just love in all of it. That has to be rooted and grounded, or you lose it. It'll spin out of control really quickly. But everything we did was done in love. Like she said, we were a unit from day one, and there was never. We would joke about this, and I would tell her, "Look, I'm not getting divorced again. If you leave, I'm going to be in your luggage when you get to the new place. Like I'm not doing it. We're in it. We're in it. I've done that before where it didn't work. I'm not doing it again. We're going to make this work."
Mm-hmm.
And the that underlying key obviously was intentionality, but also it was commitment. Commitment to making it work, even when it was hard and rough and tough. But you just stick it out.
Yeah. And so, how would you say that you, between each other, how would you handle arguments and disagreements? And how has forgiveness played a role in your marriage?
Well, um, people don't believe this, but we actually don't argue very much. So that's kind of a hard question. But the times that we have argued or had disagreements, I have learned that I'm a very fast thinker. So I can, like he said earlier, one of my three words was assertive. Um, I'm a little bitter about that. Just kidding. But I can be very assertive, and so when there needed to be a decision made, I would just make it and not think twice about it, and that could cause problems, right? So he was very much a I need to think about this. He is slow to respond to things, which would really frustrate me because I wanted a quick response. And I remember one time he told me, he said, I just need you to put the ice pick down. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I'm not a psycho walking around with an ice pick. And he was just like, babe, you have to get, like, put the ice pick down. You want answers right now. If I'm not giving you an answer, it's because I don't have something that is kind to say, and I need a minute to process whatever argument we may have just had so that I can respond to you in a way that you can hear me. And at first, that was very difficult for me because I had come from a relationship where you would just yell it out. Like you would fight about it right there in that moment. You would just, it didn't matter if you hurt somebody's feelings. You just said it. And for him, it was like, no, words hurt and I can't take those back, and I'm never going to do to you what your ex-husband did. So you're going to give me a minute. And so he would insist that I put my ice pick down and stop following him around, telling him he had to talk to me and answer me. So those were the ways that we kind of merged our communication styles so that we didn't fight as much. I had to respect that he was showing me love by not allowing me to insist on an immediate answer. And I showed him respect by allowing him time to process things. But that took a minute. I mean, it took probably the first 6 to 8 months of our marriage because I didn't understand the consistency of why he was doing it. Oh, he says a year. Okay, maybe it was a year. I'm a little stubborn. But it was very hard to learn that communication and to clean fight, which was actually also in that book that we read. But we didn't really pay much attention to that chapter because we never fought until we got married. But it was really a matter of me understanding that he wasn't trying to purposely hurt me. He was, by not giving me answers right away, that men do require a little bit more time to process, and that I am a little bit feisty, like a chihuahua.
So, were there any unhealthy habits that needed to be broken in order for you to have a successful relationship? And if so, what were they?
Oh man.
Well, mine was what I just said. I don't think he had unhealthy habits. He didn't. I mean, he may have, but they weren't like drastic.
One of the things that I tried to be very intentional on, and that was being extremely transparent because of past relationships and my past, life and addictions. I had gotten to be very squirrely, if you will. Just definitely wasn't ever fully transparent, fully honest. There was always a tinge of white lie somewhere in it. You just learn to do that. You become accustomed to it. And so coming into this marriage, I decided that I was going to be as fully transparent as I could be. And so that was one of the habits I had to break, was just making sure that I was extremely honest, from what I thought to where I was going, to where I was, to what I was spending, to who I was with. Although we were always together, I made it very matter of fact to be very open and honest and transparent. So because I didn't have that before, I didn't do that before, so I made a point to do that.
Yeah. So I know that you guys have recently gone through the process of overcoming the death of your eldest daughter, Jamie. Can you explain how that was individually and how you guys were able to work through that together?
So I don't know, or maybe Tracey can correct me, but I think although there was some individuality with it, um, we we dealt with it very together. Um, there wasn't a decision that was made on any front that said, "Hey, I'm going to do this and deal with it." Not from me and not from her, although she had every right to. When I say Tracey, uh, I don't think we ever did it where it was just one sided. Um, it obviously was very hard, very difficult, but we relied on each other throughout everything, and obviously we were very open with Jamie and let her kind of make the ultimate decision. But I don't know that we ever really did anything individually. I mean, although grief is individual, but um, through the process of it, I think we definitely were very open about it, even with the other kids, and um, very open with each other.
And could you tell people a little bit about
Yeah.
the story of what ended up
So
happening?
he kind of went straight into dealing with that part of it, but just to give y'all some backstory. So Jamie, our oldest daughter, was she was 14 when we got married. Yeah, 14. 14.
Yeah, because she was almost turned 15.
Yeah,
Yes,
she
because
had
she turned
almost
15
turned
right after.
15. Yeah, and so she had cystic fibrosis, which is a terminal illness. It's a lung disease, and there's no cure for it. So um, I I had known, obviously since she was a baby, that there was no cure for this disease, and when she had done very well, wasn't originally supposed to live to be out of her toddler years, and before I knew it she was an adolescent, and then they said, oh, she won't make it past puberty, and sure enough she made it, and then they said, well, she won't make it out of her teenage years, and sure enough she turned 20, and she died when she was 27 years old, and she died of the disease, yes, but she also had chosen to have a double lung transplant, and ultimately when 2 years after the transplant, maybe not even a full 2 years, right? A year, maybe a year and a half approximately after the transplant, she had rejected the lungs. So she had rejection. And that process, it was December, and she we knew that her lungs had been in rejection pretty much since about 6 months after she had the transplant. We knew that there was rejection, that there was things that were going on, and we went to the doctor one day, and it was probably around Thanksgiving, and the doctor said, I'm sorry, but the rejection, the antibodies are too much. There's not a way for us to reverse this. There's some things that we can do to prolong, but there's not a way to reverse it. Uh, Jamie had lived with the disease her whole life, and as her caregivers, we also lived with that disease, and as her brothers and sisters, they lived with it as well. And Jamie made the decision in December that she wanted to be put on hospice, and so we, of course, every step of the way, we both were with her, and we let her sign, hospice paperwork, which basically says if, as things get worse, we're not going to put you back in the hospital to do any life saving measures. We're going to let you die peacefully at home. And so Mike and I did just that. We gave her the last, 2.5, 2 months of her life at home, and she passed away in our dining room. Um, we had made a bedroom in there for her, and she passed away very peacefully here. The grief, and which I think kind of goes back to your original question of how did we deal with her passing individually and together. And I think individually, uh, we we dealt with grief in different ways. Like I was saying early, Mike is a silent processor. And so it was kind of more silent from him. However, internally, it wasn't. He got very, very sick. She died in February, and it was not probably a week after she died that he was in the hospital. And I think a lot of it was, yes, because he did end up with pneumonia, but the stress of life, I think, had just gotten to him to an extreme. And I guess maybe that was the beginning of March. And he was in the hospital for a pretty good amount of time, and I had never seen him sick before, and so that grief just was compounded and compounded. And I thought I was going to die. I actually, I couldn't. Life was very hard. It was very much something that I felt like I could not recover from. But life had to go on, and so um, we knew that we had three other kids that were also grieving the loss of their sister, and that we had to be present for them. We had also just started being the assistant pastors at a church. And so we had a church family that was growing. And so life kind of overtook us in busyness, which is fine, except for when you're grieving, it makes you push those feelings down that eventually have to be dealt with. So as life has maybe quieted down a little bit more for us, I think that we have found ourselves grieving. Probably it's been a little over 2 years since she passed away. We've probably grieved more in the last year than what we did even the first year. The first year holidays were hard, and now then just times are hard sometimes for us now. But the difference is for me and for him is we've learned to communicate that we're having a hard time and give each other a little bit of space. And I can always tell when he's grieving because he goes to one of her favorite restaurants. He goes and he finds a hole in the wall or something, and he'll send it in our group chat, a taco place or something, and he'll send in our group chat and say, I'm thinking about Jamie, or Jamie sure would have loved this. Or we'll go to a restaurant and he'll order an extreme amount of appetizers or an expensive dish or something. And so um, I think that's kind of how we grieve individually. I don't know. Is there another way you grieve that I don't catch on to?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I hit up Velvet Taco,
Yep.
and even though I don't like the chicken tikka masala taco, I'll get it sometimes. But normally I settle for the buffalo chicken one, and just just a way to remember her.
Yeah.
A lot of times, whenever the whole family is around, we'll eat sushi because that was her favorite thing. And after her transplant, she couldn't have sushi, which was just heartbreaking to her. And so, when the whole family's around, a lot of times we have sushi.
We
And
still
so,
do Christmas Eve, right?
uh-huh.
We still do Christmas Eve sushi night. That's our Christmas Eve tradition. Jamie started it, and we've kept it alive the last couple of years, and we'll keep on doing it until we go to heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just try to. I think we do well at trying to figure out ways to keep her alive in our hearts and um, to bring up stories about her because I think that's whenever it hurts the most is when people avoid the conversation. So I'm glad that you asked the question because to me that's the most painful thing is when people act like I did not have her,
Yeah.
or don't say anything about Jamie.
Yeah.
Somebody might cry, and I think that when moms and dads or families are grieving over a loss like that, it's okay to allow them to have a tear or two, no matter how long it's been. And that helps a lot when people tell me, their favorite memory of Jamie. And I have people that still text me and say, hey, I just passed this place. It reminded me of Jamie. And that's the highlight of my day. It doesn't bring me sadness. It brings me joy.
Yeah. And I remember growing up with Jamie because she was so much older than me by, I don't know, like almost a decade. But I viewed her so much as an older sister. She was always so sweet to me, so kind and very fun. If she ever did stuff with us or was like, hey, we're going to go to this place, it was always fun. Always fun.
Always.
And so I have so many good memories with her. And I know that that was a hard time for especially you guys and everybody that had known her. And so I think that it was just really important to bring that up because it's almost like not asking about a huge chunk of your relationship because she's just so special. And so it's just another way to remember her and also to help anybody who's listening who may have experienced the loss of a child and how they can start to recover from that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was a huge part, even of the blended family aspect, because not only were we blending, you know, 6 people, 4 kids and 2 adults, and Annabelle, our dog. That was ours. We didn't want to have a kid, but we got Annabelle. But you put into there the dynamic of one of them has a terminal illness, and so you would do extended hospital stays for extended amount of times, and multiple times throughout the years. It definitely was another dynamic that you had to work through, and your relationship had to work through, and you had to work through it with your spouse, but also with the siblings, and with the with Jamie as well. So that also brought a different dynamic that we had to learn to work through, even as a couple.
Yeah. So, to close this out with our final question, this is what is targeting the main audience of the book, and it's what advice would you give to those who are single and seeking a successful future marriage?
So don't meet and marry in 3 months. I wouldn't recommend that for anybody, although it did work for us. No, the biggest advice I would give, and I even used it for me and for Tracy, and that is commitment. Because no matter whether you're living for God or you're not living for God, or somewhere in between, um, you're going to hit highs and lows. You're going to hit hard times and good times and happy times and everything in between. But what's going to keep you is the commitment. Even when you don't want to love them, or you don't want to see their face or whatever, because you're so mad or so angry, or it's so hard, um, or things are so tough. Just being committed, and being committed to the relationship, um, not just the person necessarily, although that's part of it, but to the relationship. Because if there's kids involved, you have to be committed to that as well. You have to be committed to every part of it. Um, when we first got married, or even now, um, we were very intentional about, taking the kids with us individually and spending time with them and growing that relationship together. But again, it all boils down to commitment. It's not necessarily when you feel like it, but you have to be committed to the relationship, to the spouse, but also to the kids if you have those.
And I would say, one thing that I would say for anybody that is thinking about getting married, obviously you want to, find the one that you really feel like has a dedication to God and has the same walk and the same vision. Um, because I mean, your marriage is going to take you in places you never thought that it would take you. I mean, when we first got married, um, one of the reasons I married him is because I thought there was no way I would ever have to be a pastor's wife again. And
here we
then
are again.
here we are. 10 years later, we've been married almost 14 years, but 11 years into our marriage, uh, God called him to pastor, and it was very difficult for me because I was just like, wow, okay, we're going to do this again. Actually God was calling me as well, but I laughed about it because I was just like, well, in the beginning, I never thought this is where we were heading. I just thought we were going to be really great saints and serve in the church when we wanted to, and just go to a big church and not have to worry about being so committed, even though we were always very faithful. Um, so knowing where you're going, and being willing to change paths is very huge. But the other thing that I would say is one thing that I feel like was probably one of the best decisions that we made, and that was we had mentors that we put in our life, that were married. It was Adam and Frankie Fontenay. Shout out to them. They were a blended family, and they immediately, um, you know, 14 years ago, blended families in the church were not as popular as they are now. And they immediately took us under their wing and would come to our house. And they would have dinner with us. They would bring us to their house. They helped our kids. Um, they loved us and they listened to us. And they gave us really solid advice about raising our kids and understanding each other. It never really felt like that we had to go to them for advice. It was just kind of like we were hanging out with another couple that we really loved, and that we loved what we saw in their marriage. I loved the way he respected her and spoiled her, and I loved how feisty she was towards him, and was kind of like, she would just kind of say things, and he never was offended by them. He just would kind of laugh by it, and then they would go on. And I always thought, I want that marriage. I want a marriage where I feel so secure that I can say what I want and still have my personality and not have to worry about being put to shame in front of people or being embarrassed or anything like that. And so I would, I would say finding good mentors that can be your friend, even though they're going to be older than you. As a matter of fact, you want them to be older than you, is so healthy. And I don't think a lot of young couples do that because one, they think, oh, I just want young couple friends that can do things that we like to do. But they don't understand the value of having that mentorship of an older couple that is not your mommy or not your daddy, that is somebody that you can just hang out with and, you can say, can you believe he does this? And they can laugh with you about it, but then turn around and give you some solid advice and still love both of you. That was very, very important, I think, in our walk with God. And they're still friends of ours that we will pick up the phone and we will go and eat dinner with. And now then they get to say how proud they are of us and how proud they are of our marriage. And I know they have to be a little bit proud that they played a part in that as well. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, they
super.
were the OG blended family.
Yeah.
Yes, but
So,
they were very successful at it, and you don't want to get a mentor that's not successful.
Mhm.
Find one that is successful at it, and emulate that, and be able to mimic that, and adjust to what works for you.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely look at how other marriages, how other spouses treat each other, and be vocal about that. I know that's a big thing. While you're dating, be vocal about it. I don't like the way that they spoke, or I don't, this wasn't, gosh, that was a little bit hurtful, or how did you feel about that? It's okay to have those conversations. It's not gossiping about people. You're trying to express how you feel and how you would feel in that situation. And so having them as mentors helped us with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for being here. This concludes the interview, and we will talk to you guys later.
Thanks for
Thank you.
having us.
We enjoyed it.